What's going on, everyone? All right, so today we are moving into topic 2. I have at least glanced over a few of your coaching philosophies, and things are looking pretty good so far. So well done there. Everyone that's turned it in seems to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. So now we're heading into our next section, which is into coaching communication. We kind of hit on that a little bit at the end of Friday's class. What you'll be doing for your assignment this week is a journal reflection, or the initial journal entry here. Now, there's two main parts or components to this. And for the first part, I mean, no offense, but I don't really care about how you're feeling personally in relation to the class kind of thing. So you don't need to write down like your personal feelings about, kind of like how life is going for this. But what I want you to do primarily is to focus on part number 2 for your essay. And that's what really should be kind of the main focus here. So what I want you to do is to essentially write your reflection based on how you're relating the class to, or the topics we're learning in the class onto, or in relation to what you would use them for in actual coaching. Now, you don't have to be getting like any outside materials or anything like that. If you want to, great. But taking part 2 and applying it to this here, that's really what I want to see. So to kind of sum it all up, take what we're learning in class and tell me how you would apply that to your future as a coach. Does that kind of make sense? All right, so with communication, there are several things that we want to touch on. And with communication, we want to look at how you as a coach are going to not only communicate to your staff, but the players and your administrators as well. So first off, you want to look at what's the role of everyone in your organization. So let's assume the position that you have a coaching staff that does have several assistant coaches, and we're in, let's say, a university setting. So obviously we got the head coach. For our assistants, what typically are you going to see for essentially assistant coach positions?
Pitching coach.
Okay. What else?
Like a hitting coach.
All right.
Recruiting coordinator.
A what?
Recruiting coordinator.
Oh, okay. Recruiting.
Grad assistant.
Okay. What else?
Like a catching coach?
Maybe. I mean, you get into the bigger programs, I guess. Um, well, maybe something along the lines of just like a bench coach. All right, so we got head coach. They're the overseer. They can do really everything. Pitching coach, obviously working with the pitchers. Hitting coach, the hitters. So pretty much everybody's got a straightforward title. Grad assistants, usually they're going to be doing whatever is needed of them. So grad assistants will typically be mixing in with virtually everything that's going on. Sorry, my alarm just went off at my house. All right, well, hopefully I'm not getting robbed right now. Yeah, so I'm in Oceanside, California, and yeah, my sister's supposed to be watching my house and whatever, feeding my dogs. So hopefully, that was just her. But of course, I love it when my wife sends me messages. Oh, by the way, the alarm just went off. Oh, cool, because I'm 15 minutes into class and I'm really gonna be able to do something about it, regardless of if there's armed gunmen in there or not. I'm 500 miles away. Sorry. Okay. Now, when you are the head coach and you're communicating to the rest of your coaching staff, what is important to really be talking to them about?
The practice plan for the day.
All right, practice plan, definitely a good part. Usually when you have your practice plan, you'll have some sort of handout to go along with it. So typically you get like an outline of the events, how much time you want to spend on each, that kind of thing. How about kind of in the grand scheme of things?
Your goals for the season.
Okay, things like that'll work. How about even, just what's your role within the greater function of the team? How we want to be on the same page with what we're teaching fundamentally, to our players, those kinds of things. Now, we talked a bit last week about how ultimately, especially like even in the college world, that assistant coaches ultimately are usually trying to elevate themselves to a head coach position. When that's the case, how do you, as a head coach, really build up a an assistant coach to be able to essentially take over your position? Because especially like if we take, say, like a pitching coach's job is to coach the pitchers. The pitching coach does not, really mess with the hitters much. But if you're a head coach, you need to be able to at least somewhat intelligently know how to do every one of your assistant coaching positions. So how do you get to that point where you're an assistant coach going to a head coach and then now needing to know how to do everything else on the assistant tree? Claire, what do you think?
I would say like maybe slowly like have them take over certain days and like I don't know, to be honest.
All right, so Claire, what kind of assistants do you have?
We have a defensive specialist or coach, and then we also have a blocking coach.
Okay. And how did those two kind of interchange ideas, or how is their permission? How is their positions kind of interchangeable? Like where's the crossover with them?
I don't know. They're pretty set on what they do, but like our defensive coach is kind of taken over, to be honest. And he's basically our head coach right now. But like they come together and like when we play sixes and like real game situations, and they all like coach every aspect of the game.
All right. And that's definitely, well, I don't want to say it's completely unusual to see that, but when you're essentially assistant coach and then you take over, or you get expanded on your role within the team, you have to think of what extra responsibilities you're taking on. Um, Sorry, guys. All right, so when we look in kind of the grander scheme of baseball, not only does, say, a pitching coach need to know how to do their job, but they need to start at least looking at things from the perspective of the other positional players, the other staff, to be able to take on either more responsibility with that, or they need to be able to at least understand that aspect of the game to better their own coaching and their own player performance. So why is it important for a pitching coach to know how to teach hitters to hit?
If you're a head coach and you don't really know what you're talking about, you're probably going to get called out on it.
I mean, maybe, but again, think of it just from the pitching coach side of it. So you're the pitching coach. Why is it important for you to know how to teach hitters to hit?
So you like know how to attack the hitter when you're calling pitches.
What was that?
So you know how to like pitch at a hitter, like know what their weaknesses are and stuff.
Yeah, essentially. with, a pitching coach, if you don't know how to approach the hitters, yeah, you may be the greatest in teaching, like, say, mechanics and how to actually do the throwing. But if you're not able to, say, sequence those or throw the correct pitches to the correct hitters, then you're going to be at a major disadvantage for that. How then would something like that then tie into, say, being a recruiting coach?
Well, if you're like recruiting a player and you're primarily pitching coach, you wouldn't really understand the positives and the negatives of that one player's swing if they end up being like a dual player pitching and hitting.
Yeah, you're on the right track there. So remember, with someone that's doing recruiting, or scouting, you're either looking at the perspective of, I am scouting a player to potentially come play for me, or I'm scouting a player or team for that matter to see what they can do so that I can prepare to play against it. When I can effectively scout someone, now you see how I can cross over a lot of those principles into the different coaching positions. So while your main focus is still whatever your actual title is, you need to have a lot of these crossover skills to not only be able to improve your own kind of personal coaching skill set, but also to be able to essentially take over as a head coach when need be. Now, we talked a bit last week on how we want to essentially be on the same page with everyone. So, everyone's got to have the same kind of buy-in to the team. When you're communicating with the coaches and they share, I don't want to say, and let's say they disagree with your philosophy or your overall, coaching strategy, what do you do in that situation?
I guess you just try to communicate with your coaches and try to work out whatever is the best one for the team.
All right, but we're saying that your assistants are not agreeing with your philosophy. How do you approach that as a head coach?
Like, you mean philosophy as like a team game, or philosophy as like in a certain aspect?
Anything.
So, like, if the pitching coach isn't agreeing with like how I'm deciding to play offensively, then you just got to make sure that pitching coach knows that he's there to do his job, which is the pitchers, and I'm here to do my job, which is right. Like, if the team's not successful, you're not going to get blamed. So I'm going to have it done my way to make sure it hopefully gets successful.
Yeah, and that is a big if there. Did any of you by chance watch the Dallas Cowboys game on Sunday?
Brutal.
So there were two plays in particular that were scrutinized. One of which was when they had, I believe it was a 4th and 3. The Dallas had 4th and 3 on the oh gosh, who the heck were they playing?
The Rams. It was
Rams. There we go. Yeah.
12-yard line or something.
Yeah. and they were down by 3 points, and they didn't go for a field goal. They instead went for it and didn't get the conversion. And then on their last drive of the game with like less than a minute left, there was a roughly like a 42-yard pass that the Cowboys completed, but then it was called back for offensive pass interference on a questionable thing. Well, they lose by 3 points. What do you think the big scrutiny is that everyone's talking about aside from the pass interference?
They should have kicked the field goal. A lot of people are saying.
Yeah, because if they kick the field goal, the game's tied, right? Now, granted, that still assumes the position that, what's his name, the old Cleveland Browns kicker, could hit that through the uprights. But you'd think a professional kicker kicking a 30-yard field goal is going to be able to do that. Now, whose call is it typically when you make those kinds of calls to go for it or not?
Usually the head coach.
Okay. So let's even go with the perspective that the offensive coordinator and the special teams coach are the ones that decided we want to go for it on fourth down instead of kicking the field goal. At the end of the game, who is taking on the scrutiny?
The head coach.
And why?
They're the face of the program and like the main person that is the head of everyone, like the boss.
Exactly. I mean, how many times has Jerry Jones called out the special teams coach for whatever reason versus how many times Jerry Jones would say that Jason Garrett didn't know what he was doing and now, good luck, Mike McCarthy kind of thing. The head coach is the face of the franchise, essentially, or the face of the coaching staff in terms of your overall team performance. And that goes for anything. If, you blame someone else, what does that, or how does that make you look as a head coach?
Makes you look kind of weak.
Why?
You don't either you don't back up your team's decisions and you're just trying to get heat off yourself, or you're just not like heavy-handed, like you don't live with the situation that was created.
Essentially showing you're not in control of your own team kind of thing. Now, it's usually good practice to trust in your assistants. They're there for a reason. The offensive coordinator is there to say, we can get 3 yards in one play, and you should trust your players to be able to execute that. But at the end of the day, you have to be the one taking the responsibility for it. If you're not taking responsibility for it, that is going to not only have a negative rapport between you and your assistants because it's showing that you don't have their back, but it also gives you a negative image because it looks as though you are blaming other people for ultimately what is your final decision. So it's always great as a head coach to be the one taking the responsibility or making the overlying call or saying just even allowing the assistants to make the call. But at the end of the day, they have to be the ones to take responsibility for it. In baseball, a lot of times you'll see the pitching coach calling pitches, during the game. Occasionally, you'll see the head coach say, we want to throw this to this guy. And if the pitching coach doesn't agree, how do you in real time sort something like that out? Because it's not as though you have all day to, call the pitches for a single batter. If you're not agreeing on your approach right then, what do you do? So Nick, let's say you're the pitching coach on GCU, and you also happen to be pitching with your second body live in a game. And I don't know, insert U of A or USC hitter, whomever, at the plate. And Andy's telling you that you're going to pitch him this way, and you say that that's not the way we should pitch him. You now have to call the pitch. What do you do?
Probably just do what the head coach wants because he's the one who's allocating my paycheck.
I mean, that is definitely one reason, right? But you do want to listen to your head coach as an assistant. I mean, and aside from the paycheck aside, why is that important to do?
I think it's just a respecting and authority thing.
Yeah, I mean, think about, if I'm sure all of you have had a job at some point in your life. Are you going to disagree with what your manager says just because you don't agree to do it, kind of thing? Or are you going to suck it up and do it? So I think of those kind of situations as the ones where you want to ultimately side with the head coach, mostly because it then puts more of the onus or responsibility on the head coach, but also at the same time, it shows that you're able to set your own personal feelings aside as an assistant to be able to find an amicable solution. Whether or not you agree with that solution is a different story. Now, let's go to after the game. So we'll take Nick's scenario in two ways. The first way is that Nick calls the pitch that the head coach wants, and Nick gives up a walk-off home run. After the game, what are the head coach and the pitching coach going to be discussing? Or how should that conversation go?
Before they kind of argue about it, they should review the film to make sure that I actually executed the pitch correctly.
All right, let's assume that all happened. And yes, that you did as the pitcher everything you were supposed to do.
And you said that we lost on the one that the head coach wanted?
Yes.
I imagine the head coach might apologize or maybe just take that as a loss, I guess. Because I mean, there's never a right or wrong pitch to throw. Because it's all just probabilities of what you think the guy's going to hit.
I mean, yeah, you're definitely right with that. What I'm kind of getting at here is that when you do as a subordinate what the head coach says to do and it doesn't work, your best way to communicate that with them, aside from saying, yeah, see what happened, see what I told you, you know what I said was going to happen, yeah, that just happened. You want to make sure that you're both on the same page moving forward, because that can set up future instances where things like that happen. The communication afterward should be something along the lines of, not assessing blame to anyone, because just like you said, Nick, any single pitch, even when placed perfect, can still get hit a mile, kind of thing. To better understand the root cause of it. At the end of the day, when a head coach takes over, especially like mid-game, duties assigned to an assistant coach, that's saying that the head coach doesn't have the trust in that assistant to carry out that function. So ultimately, you need to find a way to build or better communicate that trust or build up that trust so things like that don't happen in the future. Now, what happens if we go the other way? That now, Nick, instead of giving up the walk-off home run, you struck out the guy to win the game.
Maybe the assistant coach asks, "Hey, what did you see here?"
And I think that's a great way to approach it there. You know, as the assistant, that the head coach went, over your head kind of thing and took over control, but it worked out. It's kind of the unfortunate thing, but whenever something works out, it almost doesn't matter how you got there because it worked out. But you still want to be communicating why you did what you did. And obviously, all this stuff needs to be happening away from the team. It may happen in front of other assistants, that's fine. But you need to make sure that's away from the team so you don't ever give out the impression that the coaches aren't on the same page. But it goes back to this whole open, honest communication where everyone has essentially like this open door policy kind of thing. Now, when you're communicating with players, let's look at a few different times you're going to communicate with players. So around a game, you are going to have typically your pregame talk. You're going to communicate with players during the game, and then you'll usually have a post-game talk. What's that pregame talk going to be about? And again, pregame meaning like we're at the field already, we've done our warm-ups and whatnot, had hit our batting practice, and now we're doing our little pregame talk. What is that talk going to be largely based on? Or what's going to be the talking points during that pregame talk?
Like with the players or just with the coaches?
With the players. So you're the head coach talking to the players right before the game. So Claire, I'd assume you do the same kind of thing where you have your warm-ups and then, you go into either the locker room to talk or whatever, even just on the sideline. So same scenario for you, essentially.
I would say like motivation, and then also just like going over like the broader parts of like the strategy that we're gonna do.
All right. How much time are those pregame talks going to last?
Ours are pretty short. Let's say like a couple minutes.
Yeah. So you really can't accomplish a whole heck of a lot. You're not setting up a whole new strategy. It's kind of the same thing of when you go and have a mound visit middle of the game, or you call a timeout in the middle of a set. You don't go out and try to have a whole pitching lesson, or you don't try to have a whole lesson on fundamentals middle of the game. You can't do that pregame or even really postgame either. Pregame, you want to communicate with your players to reiterate what the broad points of the plan are. So we're going to go out and do whatever X, X, and X. You want to be communicating some sort of positivity or some sort of motivation to them. On Wednesday, today's Wednesday. On Friday, we're going to cover a little bit on motivational interviewing and how that works with essentially getting change out of people, or eliciting change from people, not like getting coins from them. And you also want to set up some sort of positivity going into it. For everything, like say, like I ever hear about of people talking about like say, oh, positive energy or all that good stuff. There actually really is a lot of like scientific relevance to that the more positive you think, then you tend to have more positive outcomes. you definitely don't want to be going into this game thinking that you're outmatched or you're not going to win, because psychologically you can psych yourself out to physiologically not perform up to what your potential is just based on those thoughts. So basically, again, pregame, you want to have the broad points of the plan, you want to motivate the players, and you want to create a positive environment. Those are the three major points. We've talked about during, like in-game communication with players. These are things where you're pointing out small little tweaks that need to be made, or if we have to change some sort of point to the strategy, something that's small. You're not communicating a whole lot during the game with major talking points. You're talking very short, little changes to make. You can't go give a pitching lesson in the middle of an inning kind of thing. You make very small changes. Now, after the game, what's your post-game talk like?
Usually like a review, or where you go in depth of how the game played out, what went good, what went bad.
All right. So, Elijah, let me ask you, have you played, what sports have you played in the past?
Baseball.
Okay. And are you still playing now, or how far did you play?
Now, I stopped after high school, and I've been coaching at my high school since.
Okay. So you've already been doing some of this stuff. What do you do on your coaching staff, or what does your head coach do after a game?
Usually after the game, the way our head coach likes to do it is it'll be fairly short, and usually like the next day he'll go in depth into what the game, like what they did, because at the high school they have their last class of the day is like a baseball class, like weightlifting kind of thing. So that's when he'll go over like what we did good and what we did bad, and like what we need to improve on for like the weeks of practice coming up.
Okay. And how has that communication changed based on a win or based on a loss?
Well, last year was his first year, and we only played 3 games because of COVID. So
Yeah.
we didn't really get to see it all out. But usually it was consistent. You never want to get too high, never want to get too low. Like even when you win, you still want to point out what can we do to be better. Because if we played a better team, we wouldn't have won. Or even if we lost, we point out, hey, what did we do good? And did we basically shoot ourselves in the foot, or did we lose to a better team? And most of the time, in baseball, it's you shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, many times with baseball, and with most sports for that matter, you do beat yourself quite a bit. It's who makes that second to last error is usually the one that wins. Now, granted, sometimes you're just straight up outmatched, and yeah, it didn't really matter what you did. If GCU goes and takes on, virtually any high school team, I'm pretty confident they're going to win. Or if GCU plays virtually any D3 team, I'm pretty confident in that. But you look at even what's the difference between, let's say, Nick, what's the difference between your team and, I don't know, whoever's number one? Typically it's like a Florida State and Oklahoma, something like that. What's the difference between you and a top 10 team?
At this level, we can pretty much beat or lose to any other team. Whoever kind of shows up or doesn't show up that day, as far as like their effort level and how bad they want to win. But as far as the ability of us and like the best teams, I mean, the best teams are going to have better recruiting power than us, because if you get an offer from Vanderbilt, who's going to say no to that? So they typically get some players that are better, at least out of high school. But once you get to college, and anyone can progress at any rate. But their guys typically, they'll have more guys that throw harder, and they'll have more guys that hit more home runs. But I'd say our top players are about the same.
And I would agree with that. When you are at the Division I level with virtually anything, everyone is there for a reason, kind of thing. When you look at even Division II, definitely D3, and definitely like NAIA, you'll see that there is such huge disparities in talent levels. When I was playing D2 ball in Florida, we were in the Sunshine State Conference, and my team was a middle to bottom half of the league historically, but we still had essentially D1 players on our team, or D1 caliber players on our team. We still had guys throwing 90 plus miles an hour, and we had guys that hit 500-foot home runs, granted with an aluminum bat. But putting that all together becomes very difficult at those lower levels. When you're in the higher levels, everyone's kind of on a roughly the same playing field. You're not recruiting guys or keeping guys on a team that don't fit the mold of having that talent level needed to compete in even, the West Coast Conference or the WAC or, Big 12, anything like that. Even if you're not playing in a Power 5 conference, you're still Division I. You're still in the top, 300 total programs in the country, kind of thing. So the amount of talent there usually is comparable. It's the execution that's not. Now, Nick mentioned the recruiting side of things, and we're going to touch more on recruiting later on here. But with recruiting, how much does your name matter? So, Nick, if you don't mind me asking you, who all recruited you out of high school?
I talked to a lot of different schools, but the schools that I got offers from were GCU and Northern Colorado.
And who else talked to you?
Like big programs?
Any programs?
I mean, a bunch of the California D1s, Washington State, Minnesota, UConn. I can't remember all of them, but a lot of them they waited too long, so I didn't kind of talk to them that much.
And how about any smaller programs talk to you?
My coach for my summer ball team also coached at my local junior college, so he always wanted me to come play for them, but he knew I wasn't going to go there, so he just kind of I don't know. He just talked to me about it, but I feel like a lot of the coaches now know what kind of players are going to go to what level. So if you're a bad D3 program and there's a guy who's throwing 95, you're probably not even going to attempt to recruit him.
And what if you did try to recruit him?
Well, that player either could kindly tell you that he's not interested, or he'll say that he'll be an ego guy and say, yeah, I'm a D1 guy, so screw off.
Yeah, historically speaking, I think that's a pretty apt description of what can happen there. But what does that say about that recruiting coach? Or even D3 programs, typically they don't have a recruiting coach. They have a head coach and maybe an assistant. What does that say about that head coach?
Punch above his weight.
Trying to what?
He's trying to punch above his weight class.
Okay, outpunt his coverage kind of thing. And how would you, as an outsider, view that?
Kind of like a waste of time and energy, honestly.
Kind of, yeah. Now, granted, maybe, the coach has some sort of insight that say, Nick really wants to stay in this particular area of the country. And that's why we're trying to get him, because we know through our sources that he wants to stay geographically in this vicinity. So even though he might not fit typically what our program would be, we're going to try because we know he wants to stay there. On the other hand, and this is exactly how my coach in Ohio did it, because he was a D3 coach, and he has the record for most wins in a career, but it's because he coached the team for something like 25 years and won on average about 12 games a year out of depending on the year, a 40 to 50 game schedule. When you're recruiting guys that are clearly above your pay grade, so when you're trying to really get the D1 prospects and you're a D3 program, especially not a good D3 program, it makes you look kind of laughable almost. However, in our conference was the College of Worcester, and they had won the D3 national championship, I don't even know how many times. How then, and the big caveat here is that with D3, you don't get any scholarships. So there's no scholarship money to give. How do you build essentially a dynasty of a baseball program, or any sports program for that matter, at the D3 level when you don't have scholarship money at all? Because Nick, would you think it's laughable if the best D3 program in the country came after you?
If it's a program that's historically really good, then I feel like that's not laughable. But it's really hard, like you're saying, to get people to want to go there, especially because I'm not sure if it's true, but I'm pretty sure all D3s are private schools, so all the tuitions are super expensive. Is that correct?
I've never thought of it, but now that you point that out, yeah. Huh.
I just don't know. Like, I would not want to pay 50 grand a year to play D3 baseball.
I really can't think of a D3 program that isn't private. Oh, I've never even thought about that. So good job pointing that out. But yes, you bring up that excellent point there. Now, granted, 50 grand might be a little bit of some hyperbole there, but at the same time, not. If you're not getting any scholarship money, you're paying, full tuition unless you're getting other financial aid. That's very tough for someone to stomach that. You'll see many high school recruits go to programs that may not be the best fit just because of that money issue. So money is a huge thing. And we'll get into that again later when we get on recruiting too much. But what I wanted to really primarily drive home here with recruiting is that when you're a head coach and you're recruiting and you're trying to go above your pay grade for the players you're pursuing, it does kind of make you look a bit laughable. And I hate to say that, but it's true. If you go after players, let's say, you're my former college in Ohio, Hiram College, which I guarantee not a single one of you have ever heard of, because I never heard of them and I lived 30 miles away from them. And you got a guy, so again, I'm going to say it's Nick because Nick plays baseball still. And Nick is being recruited by Hiram and Ohio State and, University of Michigan and, let's say, Nebraska, Minnesota, whatever. When Hiram knows, D3 Hiram College knows that Nick is being recruited by every Big Ten school, what's the point of them still trying to pursue him when they clearly know he is a talent that is much better than what they have or what they can offer? Usually, an initial meeting is worth it. So having at least an initial communication is typically worth it for virtually any recruit, because that at least can gauge interest. Because who knows, like I said with that scenario before, what happens if, Nick wants to stay close to home? Or what happens if he wants to go to a small school because he likes that environment? Well, now that completely changes everything, right? So an initial, recruiting visit, call, whatnot, is not always a bad thing. It's when you continue following up after that engagement is clearly not where it should be. Now, granted, I never got recruited to like huge schools. I got recruited to a couple Horizon schools, like YSU, Youngstown State University, where I went in high school. I did dual enrollment there. They offered me preferred walk-on status, but I never got any D1 scholarship offers. Got a bunch of D2 scholarship offers, and then a bunch of D3 schools wanted me to play for them. So, I mean, I was a very middling kind of player. But after I had told schools that, I'm really, I've kind of narrowed it down to these couple, the ones that kept trying to contact me were the ones that I just ended up, it just rubbed me the wrong way, and it's almost like dating, right? You reject someone, which I don't have much experience with rejecting people. Usually I'm the one being rejected. But when you reject someone and they continue to persist, what's your impression of them?
That they're pushy.
Kind of. I mean, Ananda, I've already told you I don't like you. What more do I need to say? I mean, no, I don't mean that to you personally, but if I tell you that I don't want to be part of your program and you keep trying to give me reasons to do that, now you just kind of look like a used car salesman kind of thing. And we definitely don't want that. So do you see kind of how these broad points with the recruiting process and just the communication as a head coach or a recruiting coordinator can really set a big tone for how your program is perceived? Because what's the saying? Perceptions are reality. I like this here, this little part in the book, using motivational quotes. Do any of you use these, or are any of you ever subjected to these? I always thought motivational quotes were, I don't know, something that was kind of cheesy. So,
I mean, like you see them on the wall in the weight room, but other than that, not really.
oh man, I don't have it on here. All right, can you all still see my screen? Do you see the new tab I just opened? No. Okay. So Zoom used to have a feature where it was called, you could freeze the screen, but now they don't have that. Here we go. All right, my absolute favorite coach that I just try to emulate all the time is Coach Kent Murphy. So here's the motivational quote I use whenever, I'm telling my students to do something right. First rule of life is never to waste a good home run swing on something dumb like practice. What do your motivational quotes actually, what are they actually supposed to convey? out there? Like if you're using motivational quotes, what ultimately should they do other than to say motivate players?
I don't know, give the players like something to think about.
All right, and what are they thinking of? Like what do you want them to think about? Just broadly speaking.
I don't know, like whatever situation they're in, or how they could be better.
Well, Elijah, you said you use those in the weight room, right?
Yeah, they have one on the wall in the high school. At least they used to.
What's the point of it?
I don't know. I always thought it was like kind of cheesy.
When you're using anything like a motivational quote or any sort of external modality to help with like inspiring players or anything like that, you want to use it essentially situationally. That's why that when you have like the motivational quotes that are like painted on the walls, usually aren't the best ones, because yeah, that's great, even if it's the best quote in the world, you see that one time and or a couple times and okay, well, I get it. When you're using anything like motivational quotes, you want to use it so that it's situation specific. You want to try to motivate or inspire performance based on the task at hand or based on the situation at hand. It's great to do stuff like that, like in the weight room, where you're trying to motivate someone to do something better based on even loosely based on what it is that you're going to be doing for the day. But like we've been saying, they can be pretty cheesy at times, so be careful with those. Myself personally, I think handouts are just a way to say, here, you throw this away. Now, the last thing I kind of want to finish up is with individual meetings. So this is kind of one of the oh, how about that? So there was actually a picture here of John Wooden. And I think it's just a generic picture of him like talking to his team, but they don't have that in here now, apparently. All right. Individual meetings. What's the purpose of individual meetings? Coach to player.
To talk about something that only regards that player.
Okay. And what would that be? Or what could that be?
Something that they did or they need to improve on.
All right, that's definitely one of them. When do you get an individual meeting, typically speaking, in the course of any athletic season?
Are you referring to like a sit down in my office meeting or just on the field 2-second thing?
No, like a sit down in the office, like a real meeting.
You said when during the season?
Yeah.
Probably not an hour before the game starts.
Probably not. Yeah, if something like that happens, something has gone seriously wrong. You're getting this meeting.
Go ahead.
So you're getting this meeting because you're not suiting up today, kind of thing.
I would say probably on an off day from a game or like before practice.
Okay. Claire and Anna, did you guys ever have, or do you ever have individual meetings with players, either as a player or as a coach?
We go into the coach's office like every other week. We have like a scheduled time that we go in.
For individual meetings?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. I've not heard of that, well, used to that extent. And how often are you, or how long do your meetings typically last? And what's usually discussed?
I'd say everyone's are different. They're scheduled to be like 15 minutes, but some people walk out like after 5. Usually
Okay.
I'm there for like 30, 45 minutes. And yeah.
And what kind of things would you be talking about? Like, you don't have to go into details, but like, what's the broad strokes of it?
When I'm in there, we talk about like the other teams. We talk about just like life in general, like school, just like how life's going. And then sometimes I watch like our recruits and like talk to them about what I see.
All right. Amanda, how about you?
Our coach only had meetings with us if we were doing really bad, like academically or socially on the team. So if someone just wasn't being the best teammate to everyone else, he would meet with us. But otherwise, there was like nothing.
All right. And both you and Claire show the general two sides of it. You have either preventative or prophylactic type meetings, or you have reactive type meetings. So Claire, you already have your meetings scheduled out. You know you're meeting with the coach regardless of what's going on. And by you saying that some players meet for 5 minutes, others for 30 plus minutes, says that it is all just a regularly scheduled meeting and the time essentially changes based on the situation. Whereas Ananda, you're saying that you have meetings only when something bad has happened. That is a strictly reactive meeting. I'm only talking to you because I have to handle a situation as the coach. When you look at having individual meetings, like Nick was saying, you want to have those to discuss things with an individual player that only pertain to that player. Now, I mean, it may be stuff that extends to the greater team, like, say it was a group of players that did something or are doing something, and the coach wants to meet with each one of them individually to either get the story or just discuss your role in whatever. But it's an individual meeting is for individually related instances. The major times you get meetings, or the major times you'll see meetings scheduled, are before a season. So typically this would be like before you started even like your conditioning program, or like for baseball, be before you started fall ball. You typically will see another individual meeting at the end of your fall season, maybe before the beginning of the spring season. And then you'll typically see another meeting at the end of your spring season. So after the season's over. Usually the initial meeting is kind of just setting the groundwork, making sure everyone's on the same page with everything. Pretty generic for the most part. For your post-fall or pre-spring meeting, you're typically discussing what your specific role is going to be on the team. Because when you think about it, when you're playing fall baseball, you have a much, much bigger team than what is going to be playing on game days, typically speaking. Well, what happens if you're giving someone a ton of reps during fall practices, and then all of a sudden when the season starts, you just don't even have them on the travel roster, and you didn't tell them any reason why? What does that do?
Creates confusion.
That's one of the things, definitely. What else?
It also brings this idea of like that the other players see that they think, oh, coach could just decide to go in a different direction at any time, and I won't have like any pre-warnings.
Yeah, exactly. And stuff like that creates discord amongst players. The old saying is whatever, a handful of bad apples spoils the whole harvest or whatever. You may hear the term a team cancer. Well, cancer spreads, right? You get a player that gets upset and starts essentially trouble within the team, it can really lead to a lot of, negative things happening. So communication, regardless of if it's good or bad or positive, negative, is essential between the coaching staff and the players, because that's at least going to put everyone on the same page. Now, going back to that scenario, if I have a meeting with that player after the fall league and say, hey, we wanted to give you a lot of reps because we see potential in you in the future, but we don't think you're there yet. Now, what does that player say or think?
Just motivates them to keep working instead of just giving up.
Hopefully, yeah. If anything, it at least shows that the coach has a long-term vision for the player. It just may not be right now. Even if it never comes to fruition, at least you are giving that player an open, honest evaluation and giving them a reasonable reason why you're not going to be playing them. It's not like you're just up and, no communication, they're gone kind of thing. Typically, when you have meetings during the season, it's either as part of, say, strategy, or it's usually to communicate something like punishment. So the meetings that typically happen during a season are usually fit into one of those two categories. The importance of talking to each player individually is that you're able to set expectations for the player, set a personal improvement program, and you're also able to make sure that everyone is on the same page. By setting the expectations, you know what you should be doing. Now, you're typically not going to be saying, like, laying out the exact way of how to get from point A to point B, but you're going to be saying, this is where you're at, this is where you need to be. And a lot of times it is kind of as the player, you figure it out on your own. But at the same time, you know where you stand. There's no guesswork there. As long as you are, as a coach, open and honest with players, you'll at least gain their respect, or at least you hope you gain their respect, because you know that you haven't deceived them in any way. You were open and honest with that communication. You're not trying to, say, give them the wrong idea. I'm not stringing you along kind of thing. Does that all kind of make sense? And very last thing I want to close with, and then I'll let you guys go, is with this whole bit here, communicating with parents. When I went to college, then started playing baseball, I thought parents were completely out of the picture. It wasn't until I came back to Ohio that I realized they kind of weren't. But in college, I can't imagine ever my mom or dad complaining to my college head coach, like, oh, Michael's not playing enough. Why isn't he playing? That kind of thing. Why do you think that is something that's even seen as socially acceptable, even in the high school level?
Well, at the high school level, it's for baseball at least. We don't have the money or the size, like the amount of players as like a football team would. So we have to do all of our own fundraising through our own boosters, and it's usually a lot of the parents working. So as like a head coach, you kind of owe those parents that are working for your program at least some sort of communication back and forth, instead of just leaving them in the dark after they do all this work for you.
And that's definitely a very valid side of that. When you have smaller programs, especially in high school and even to college for in some cases, parents are very active with a lot of these like fundraising type things. And yeah, they inevitably become more ingrained with the program because of that. Whenever you attach money to something, people become very attached to that. I don't typically pay for something to get nothing out of it. you're going to expect something to come out of that. And that can be a good and bad thing. You know, establishing a good relationship with the parents can be great because it helps to, you know, really set a good open communication line between you and the players. It can also be a very bad thing because, like I said, parents can have expectations. And what do you tell a parent who maybe is one of your top boosters that, hey, your kid kind of sucks?
I would like to know that from you because we kind of got that going right now.
And I've had to do that before with, like, even coaching pony league, so 13 and 14-year-olds. And like I said, when they were 13, the group was 13, went to the Pony League World Series, and we went from Ohio out to California. And granted, Pony Baseball bought our plane tickets and gave us our transportation, like to and from the hotel to the fields, and paid for our hotels. But everything else was kind of on our own. You know, we had to pay for all our meals, and we had to pay for, you know, anything else essentially we bought. And one of the kids' parents was pretty affluent and essentially sponsored the team. And his kid was, for lack of a better word, not good. When we were winning, like, say, you know, kind of blowout games, it's real easy to put him in, right? Because he can't screw up that bad, right? He's like a right fielder, you know, not a whole lot you can do to really screw it up there. But when we're in these close games and he wouldn't play because, you know, we're out to win, you know, a national championship kind of thing, I myself would be in the position where I would kind of take a lot of the blame of it, or the brunt of the parents talking, mostly because I was the pitching coach. So I would typically, like, talk to the parents, like, when we were hitting, which I probably shouldn't have in hindsight. So I caught a lot of heat from that. And the way I would communicate it is typically that you want to give your team the best chance to win. And sometimes it's better to shoot someone once in the head than it is 5 times in the chest. So just telling them straight up, look, Trey's just not one of our best players right now. And when I said something like that, I didn't recognize by including right now, it meant that there was possibility for hope in the future. So that wasn't a good way to do it. So what I should have said was, look, Trey's not one of our best players. We're doing everything we can to get him in the game, especially when we have these games where we have set a big lead. But his skill level isn't at the point where I believe that he can be a valued or give us a contribution against the higher tiered teams. So something like that, where you are just straight up, and yeah, you may get a lot of pushback from it, like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about and all that. But you've at least set the clear expectations of what it is happening. It's hard as a parent to accept the fact that your child may not be the best, because if you think about it, when you're growing up, you have a ton of players playing with you when you're in T-ball, little league, whatnot. By the time you get to high school, you know, that number has whittled down considerably. You get to college, even less. I mean, you know, I think of the hundreds of players I played with in T-ball, the like 18 players that were on our high school team, and the 5 of us that made it to college ball. And, you know, you see how that number dwindles down. You know, how many all-stars were there in T-ball kind of thing versus how many players actually made their high school varsity team. And you see how the talent level gets much, or the talent pool gets much smaller the higher up you go. just because you were good before doesn't mean you're going to be good in the future, kind of thing. So very roundabout way to say that when you're communicating with parents, especially at kind of that high school level, it's best to really just be blunt with them and not confuse, and choose your words very carefully so you don't confuse them at all to give them that false hope. At the same time, you have to realize what you're risking by doing that. You know, if that player or if that parent is responsible for bringing a lot of funding to the school or to the program, I mean, you do potentially risk losing that, you know, funding stream. But at the same time, are you going to essentially have the team play or put the team in a position where they can play worse by including that player in the starting lineup? It's a very tricky kind of line to navigate there. Now, when you get to, like, say, college, you know, I don't know if, like, say, Nick, you've ever had any instances where parents became an issue or a problem there, but what would you expect to happen if a parent was complaining to your coach about playing time?
It's a tough question to answer because I know that my coach would try to be respectful about it towards them. But honestly, when you're in college, it's kind of a joke if your parents are trying to talk to your coach about playing time.
Yeah. And like I said, I never thought that was a thing until I went back to play D3 ball in Ohio at Hiram College. And I transferred in the spring of 2006, 2007, something like that. And one of the first things that our coach said in our whatever pre-season meeting, team meeting, was talking about how, like, don't have your parents talk to me kind of thing. Like, I didn't realize, like, that was even a thing at all. When you're in college, you're essentially viewed as an adult, right? If your parents are coming and trying to fight your battles, not only is that going to make you look very bad with the coaching staff, but that could potentially make you look pretty bad to your teammates. Like, hey, you know, if something happens to Nick, his mom's going to come and complain, kind of thing. And actually, one of the softball girls' parents would routinely come to, like, the games from, like, she actually lived in California, would fly up to Ohio for like a weekend and would complain to the coach if, you know, her daughter wasn't playing. I mean, it was kind of almost fascinating to see that, you know, just happen, at least from, you know, a bird's eye view kind of thing. And granted, you know, I played baseball, I didn't play softball, but everyone from all the sports knew the gossip and everything. So hearing things like that happen, it really was kind of off-putting even. You know, you tend to view people a different way if you know their parents are kind of lurking behind you, kind of thing. All right, so that's about everything I wanted to cover here with the communication side of things. I do want to pick up with communication to administrators on Friday, because I want to talk about my role as the faculty athletics representative and what that means as far as communicating with players and with coaches. And obviously, since I'm a professor as well, doing that. But what kind of questions do you all have for me right now? All right, so if you guys don't have any more questions, then I will let you go a few minutes early here. And as always, I will stick around till you all leave. But if not, I do really appreciate your time, and I will see you all here on Friday.
Thank you. Have a good one.